All right, take three. Welcome to Critical Weight Theory. And today on Christmas Eve, I'm getting a little bit random because I'm doing a music video review, and it has nothing to do with Christmas, really. Today I'm talking about a song that's at the crossroads of pop music and movie history. It's called Romancing the Stone, and it comes from Eddy Grant in 1984. Practically no one thinks this is his signature hit. That title certainly belongs to Electric Avenue, but this song tells us a lot about where pop music was in the mid 1980s, how movie soundtracks worked back then, and how versatile Eddy Grant really was. So let's set the scene here. By 1984, Eddy Grant was already a global star. He'd had massive success a couple of years earlier with Electric Avenue, and another song called I Don't Wanna Dance. These songs made him instantly recognizable, not just for their hooks, but for how they blended reggae, pop, funk, a little bit of rock, and social commentary. I like to sprinkle a little bit of rock into all of these genres, because if you really think about it, like even Michael Jackson, they call him the king of pop, but there was a little bit of that rock energy in his music, and you know, it's just a little bit rock and pop was always combined in a lot of these things, and it's a very broad genre, and back then rock and pop were more blended together in the public imagination. I suppose the genres weren't so, I guess, rigidly conceived. So, like, if you listen to a lot of, I guess, classic music just in general, I think you'll see where I'm coming from maybe a little bit more. How genre distinctions, they're not quite as neat and clean as some out there would have us think. But anyway, I could get a whole different episode if I go too deep into that. But Grant wasn't just a performer either. He wrote his own material, he produced it, he ran his own label called Ice Records, from what I understand, and he was hands on in a way that wasn't especially common at the time. So when Hollywood came calling, he seemed to be in a good position to say yes. And Romancing the Stone was written especially for the movie of the same name. The film starred Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner, and Danny DeVito, and it was a romantic adventure with a light, playful tone, at least from what I gather. I haven't seen it, to be honest, because I guess one of the tests of watching a movie soundtrack song is whether or not that song makes you interested in potentially seeing the movie. So in a way, it might have spoiled my ability to assess this song if I had watched the movie first or something like that. But I do know that the movie has some exotic locations, for lack of a better word, some danger mixed with romance, and a sense of escapism. And that's exactly what the song is trying to capture and the video that accompanies it. So, importantly, the video doesn't retell the plot, so there's no play by play of the movie and the lyrics or anything like that. Instead, Eddy Grant focuses on the feeling. There's a sense of adventure here, romance, travel, and the idea of being swept away somewhere exciting and unfamiliar. It's a soundtrack song in the purest sense. It exists really just to set a mood. And musically, it sounds very much like its time. You've got synth driven 80s pop production layered over a somewhat reggae esque rhythm, though it's not really an on the nose reggae song, and it's not that much of an on the nose pop song either. And that's really something that I would say Eddy Grant had a knack for. Although, there are some Eddy Grant songs that are more reggae heavy sounding, but he has sort of a gift for not laying or not relying too much on the stereotypical genre stuff. Like, so if he's got some rock elements, you can still notice that them, but they're a little less on the nose than some other songs. And the same thing goes with the reggae stuff too. Like, you can detect some reggae influence, but he doesn't necessarily go full reggae in a song. It's something that a lot of musicians don't seem to do, and I think that's something that actually makes Eddy Grant a little bit unique. I don't know. You might disagree with me on this point. I'm not sure, but I think there's something to that. It's something that sets Eddy Grant a little bit apart. And the song is somewhat bright, polished, and cinematic, yet still has a raw energy and a moody feel, a mix of moods that's hard to pin down and really explain, all while sounding straightforward at the same time. So it's like a weird sort of general blend of complexity and simplicity at the same time. I don't really know exactly how to explain that either, but it's just the vibe that I get from listening to this track. And compared to some of Grant's more politically charged work, this one is really more just about fun. As far as I can tell, there's no heavy message, at least no obvious one, no easily discernible protest, just some movement and energy. And this was part of its job. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. From what I understand, despite being written for the movie and promoted as its theme, the song Romancing the Stone apparently barely appears in the film itself. And you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that's what I've learned about it. And from what I understand, it's used only briefly and it shows up in the closing credits. And this is despite Casey Kasem even announcing it on American Top 40 in June of 1984 as the title song to the movie. So expectations were clearly set. But at the same time, I mean, were they going to have the song repeatedly running throughout the entire movie? That's typically not how this is done. But a person might have expected to hear it more, perhaps. I don't know. But to help reinforce the connection, the music video leaned pretty hard into the film tie-in. It features Eddy Grant performing in a jungle-like setting. Presumably, it could have actually been a jungle, with clips from the movie cut throughout. So you don't get a lot of spoilers. You just get a sense that there's action in the movie, which is a really good thing for a music video to do. You don't really want to get the whole story of the entire movie that it's promoting if it's part of a soundtrack. And there's even a playful moment where through some clever editing, Eddy Grant catches a flying guitar and launches into a guitar solo, which is kind of fun. I I don't know who came up with that idea, but it's always funny to have a little bit of like a playful, I guess a little bit of a corny element to it. It's definitely reinforcing the idea that the song isn't that serious. And it's nice that Eddy Grant felt comfortable to not always write serious songs or whatever, or to not always do things a certain way. So it's very 1980s and very aware that it's selling a movie as much as a song. Chart wise, the track apparently did well, though it didn't dominate. In the United States, it reached number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 22 on Cashbox, which is I've never even heard of Cashbox that I can recall. Um, but that's a little bit of information that I got anyway. It performed better in Canada, where it climbed to number 7. Internationally, it charted in places like New Zealand and Germany, and it just missed the top 40 in the UK. So, it wasn't the biggest success, but still, I wouldn't be too disappointed if I could say that about something that I did, something I recorded. It also found a second life on the dance charts, peaking at number 12 in the US, and made a modest appearance on the soul chart. So it was definitely a pretty successful track. Still, it was inevitably overshadowed by Grant's earlier hits. When people think of Eddy Grant in America, they usually think of Electric Avenue. The song looms large over pretty much everything else. So, where does Romancing the Stone, where does it find its place? It's a good example of his crossover appeal, I would say. It shows how easily he could adapt his Caribbean influenced sound to mainstream pop without losing his identity, and even while promoting a film. It also highlights his involvement in film and media despite, you know, uh, traditional album releases, being a bigger thing at the time. Keep in mind, this was 1984. The album and movie tie-ins weren't as much of a thing back then. They still were, don't get me wrong. That had already been established as a phenomenon, but it was still some relatively new terrain. MTV was young at the time, and this was sort of unexplored, or largely unexplored territory by this point. So the song was included on his 1984 album Going for Broke, but it's often remembered less as an album track and more as a piece of soundtrack history. It's not a revolutionary song, it's not a political statement, but it does exactly what it's set out to do. It captures a moment, a mood, and a very specific era of Hollywood and pop music being deeply intertwined and branching out to different musical genres at a time when doing that really make things or made things seem fresher. But I can't get my past and my present tense correct. Anyway, moving on. Romancing the Stone is a perfect artifact of the early 1980s. It's It's cinematic, slightly glossy, and built to make you feel like you're going somewhere exciting, even if just for a few minutes. And sometimes that's more than enough. And that's really why it made me a little bit more interested in seeing the movie. So I don't know when I'll finally get around to watching Romancing the Stone. Maybe I never will, maybe I'll get hit by a bus tomorrow. I guess you never know exactly when you're going to get around to anything. But I do have it on my list of movies to watch and probably review at some point. So be on the lookout for that. If not, soon, maybe years down the road. All right, so that's about it, and have a good day.